Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. My name is Mike Moscato, and this is the October DALiM Tips and Tricks webinar. Uh, the subject this month is going to be working with stages in ES. Before we get into it, we'll do two of our housekeeping things that we do. As always, we remind people that if the display isn't fitting properly on your screen within the GoToWebinar app, or if you're viewing it through the browser, you should have that little zoom button up in the top left so you can get it to fit properly to your screen.
We need to update that. On newer versions, it's going to be at the top middle of the window you're looking at.
Top middle. Oh, well, people, would have been lost. They would have been looking in the left and they would have never found it. All right. The second thing I'll mention, if you hear something that sounds like a meow, it's not me, it's my cat. You never know when that might happen, so don't be distressed. I haven't changed into an animal. So let's get started. The first thing I want to mention about going over stages is, this is not a new feature in ES. So, you might say, well, what do you guys want to go over? Something that's been around for a while. And frankly, what triggered it is we had a customer recently who asked about doing something in ES, and when I thought about it, I said stages is a good way to do it, although it was perhaps a bit non-obvious. So that kind of triggered some discussions, and we after that had a couple other customers who wanted to do some stuff that was also kind of stage related. So these are some of the things we're going to go over, and I think you can probably guess these are the basics: how to do it, why you want to do it, and how it works. Stage downloads is one I don't think even I played around with all that much. We'll go through the workflow logic. I think the way a lot of people were initially introduced to stages is this business about hiding and revealing things per user. And the whole business about recalling an earlier stage we'll go over. Now, I was trying to think of a pithy way to describe what stages are. And this, I think, is pretty close, is that stages are essentially a tag that you assign to a file based on where it sits in the ES document workflow. And a key thing to remember about that is you could tag a file or assign two different stages to it, but it's still the same file. So although the file may be the same, you can tag it differently so that ES treats it differently. And of course, after I came up with my pithy description, I decided to just do some verbal diarrhea here as well. The kind of things we can do with it, right? We can store and restore different versions of a file within a workflow. And in this sense, we're managing multiple versions of a file, but it's not true ES revisioning. And you'll see what I mean when I show an example later. And as I mentioned, you can reveal it to different users at different parts. And you can download files per stage, which is a good one to know. So let's look at ES. And I'm going to start with the most basic of basic examples. Because one thing that, as you look into dealing with this stuff, the notion of stages is actually a very basic thing in ES. This is, this is one of our default workflows you get with ES. This is the WIFL dialog. There ain't much to it. File comes in, it makes preview, and have a nice day, right? That's all it is. But if you do a show context on this thing, even in this thing, the notion of a stage exists. There's the Stages tab. And, we always have these two files that are referenced. The input file, he's the guy that came in, right? And the working file is what ES considers to be the current active file. So in this workflow, there's no surprise. The file that came in is also the current working file, right? Because all I did was make a preview. So there's not all that exciting, right? But again, the point I want to make is the notion of stages is really kind of baked into the way ES behaves. So let's look at something that goes a little step beyond that. Here's the same idiotic simple file I'm using for a lot of my examples. Let's do show workflow again. What do we got going on here? File comes in, all right? We know, based on what we saw earlier, he's the input file. But I'm then running it through a workflow that traps, normalizes, and color manages the file. Then it stops to be approved. If we look at show context, it looks pretty much the same as what we saw earlier. However, if we look now, we know that the input file and the current working file are not the same. That's our original file. That's our normalized, color managed, trapped file. Okay, what can we do with that? Well, we could do this. We know normally if I just double click and open this file, it's going to show us the current file, right? That's the one that got trapped. There's my trappage there. But there also exists the possibility to compare. We could do a compare on this file right now. Go to Document View and say View Stages. And I can tell it, I want to look at the input file and I want to look at my current working file. So what do we see? Look up top. It says he's the input file. That guy's my working file. So if I want to see if my normalized file is in any way jacked up, right? If it drastically changed, I can compare the two. So you can see left-hand side is the file that is trapped, and pretty obviously the one on the right is the untrapped. Left is normalized, color managed. Right is original input file. So you could almost look at this as a pseudo visual compare, right? Because we know that visual compare in Twist runs a routine where it checks the original against the file that's been processed. The obvious difference being visual compare actually sends you out a report, a warning, whereas this is pretty much a case where someone may want to take a look and see, I don't know, maybe there's something wrong with this file. You can very quickly throw up the original and the current processed file to see what's what. One thing to remember, quick key wise, is we know that S displays a file. You didn't see me do that, but you can take my word, I did. If you want to view stages, you hit Alt S, and then it gives the ability to choose what you want to see. Now, let's do something a little different that makes things for a normal user perhaps a little more user-friendly and a little more obvious. Here's our favorite file again. And it's going through pretty much the same workflow it did before. It came in, made a preview, got normalized, trapped, and color managed, and comes to an approval step. But you'll notice I stuck a couple of extra steps in here. When you're building your ES workflow, if you get down here into the WIFL area, you've probably seen these options, save working stage and restore working stage. Save working stage is a way for me to tag or define a stage name at a specific point. And, for maybe more user-friendly-ish displays, you want to put something in here that maybe people can sort out a little easier than working file or input file. So when my file comes in, I'm going to tag it or call the initial stage original. After it comes out of that normalizing workflow, I'm going to say, that's my normalized file. Does it really change at all what the file is? No, but it changes the way they're referenced and how I can perhaps more easily take a look at them. Additionally, if I go into show context, look at my stages now. Based on what we know, the original file, the one tagged original, and the input should be the same, which they are, right? It's that file 22171. We can also deduce that the file that we tagged at the normalized stage is the same as the working file, which it is. So there's a bit of a duplication in here, but I think it's useful if you're going to do this sort of thing to define or tag things with a name that's sensible or meaningful to users. So if I do Alt-S, view stages, someone can look at this and go, I don't know what that stuff is, but I know I want to look at the normalized and the original file side by side and see what's what. And this is really the same thing you just saw me do a second ago, where I'm comparing these two files. I won't bore you with doing it again because it's really same game, but with different names. Okay, the next example is going to be the one that kind of triggered all this, and I'm going to have to do some splaining here so that it perhaps makes sense. We have a customer who's going to transition to ES, and they're currently using Mistral, and one of the things that some of their Mistral users like is they like to be able to view a file kind of like this. Although they may have the file ready, the print ready file, they like to look at a marked up file. So it's got, the trim, bleed, and safety lines on it. It's got some other, decorate stuff, the trim size, and maybe some file name stuff at the bottom. Okay, fair enough. But again, they want to be able to view it within the interface itself. And having said that, once they've looked at it and they like it, what they're going to approve, though, is the print ready file, right? Let's look at a workflow. This is pretty much the same workflow we had last time with a little extra goodies in it. Input, stage, original, no different. Normalize it, trap it, save it. But notice there's a third thing here. I'm sending it through a twist workflow that does all the decorate mark stuff, right? And when it comes out of it, we define the stage as, I just called it with marks. So you look at this and you say, the last thing you did was that marks file. So that is now the current working file. But when we release the file and send it on its merry way to the printer, we don't want to send them that, right? So after that guy comes in and he makes a preview, we tell ES, restore or make the normalized file the current working file. So we now have the ability for these guys that they want to look at their marked up file when they're viewing things, right? They can look at that guy and, be happy as a clam. That's the guy they want to see. But when they approve the file now, the file that goes out is the print ready normalized file. Now let's take it a step further. Let's say they want to view the file with marks, but they also want to view the print ready file. So they can still view those two side by side if they have a desire to. Another thing, let's say they want to download. But again, they're just jonesing for this file with the marks. How can I download it? We know normally if we say download document, what's it give us? It gives us the current working document. So if we look at that guy, that's not my file with marks. So how do I get it? Well, if you've ever looked at this, when you right-click download, you'll see there's an option called stage. And this will let me tell ES that's the guy I want. So you can grab and download locally whichever stage version you want. So that should be the marked up guy, which he is. So again, what we're looking at here is the ability to work with multiple versions of a file, but again, as we know in ES, that kind of sounds like revisions, right? But you sure don't see one of those 2-2 or 3-3 things in here, because this really isn't a revision. This is just the stage feature letting us kind of bounce and bop between different versions based on what we want to see and what we want to push out. And again, remember, probably sound like a broken record here, but although the last file we really processed, right, through Twist here, the one that put the marks on it, he's the last guy we made. We told ES, fine and dandy, but we want the active file to be the normalized file, the one that we saved here. Okay, next, let's look at the feature that I think a lot of people may be familiar with, maybe some not, which is the ability with stages to hide and reveal files to users based on where they may sit in a workflow. This is usually explained in terms of internal users, right? You doing your own internal production, which is pretty much what this guy is that's seeing these. And you having control over when you want to reveal those files to your external customer users. Oh, I logged out. Let's get back in. Here's what I want you to note. The user I'm logging in has this specific profile called external. We'll get into what that is in a second. So here we are. We got two people looking at the same thing. This guy is looking in the project called Hide It. You don't see anything. This guy sees these files. So the more clever amongst you might say, you're using profile masks to hide things. But there's no profile masks involved in here. This is just some pretty straightforward ES setups. Now notice this file here. There's 3 versions of it. So this thing got rejected and got marked up. Because if you look down here at my revisions, right? First revision was rejected, second was rejected, and we're waiting on whether the third's going to be okayed. Now, you may not want your user or your customer to know that you went through 48 revisions on this thing before you finally got it right. So I'm going to say, yeah, this file is good. I think I'll approve it. So it's moving forward now to this customer approval step. And if we look here in Chrome, lo and behold, this guy can now see the file. But notice he doesn't see 3 versions. He only sees it as 1 because the only thing that ever made it through to him was the last version. And so now we want to say, well, what is it that hit it and revealed it for this guy? Let's look at the workflow. We initially defined a stage as the internal stage. That's us, right? That's us ES guys doing the work. Only after it's approved internally do we expose it to the outside, and we expose it by setting a stage name of external. That in and of itself doesn't do the full job for us. What we use to take advantage of that specific external stage name is a user profile. And for our external user guys, the user profile they have can only see 1 stage. Usually this thing defaults to all stages. That's why, you're jumping around ES, you see everything. But if you want to restrict what people see, you give them very specific stage names. And again, of course, turn that guy off, all stages. If this user using that profile starts jumping into some of these other jobs, and I got a boatload of files in here. He's not going to see anything.
We got a question. If you go back one screen to that profile settings.
Sure. Let me get here. Yep.
What is the inform user about not allowed slots?
Well, I was hoping no one would ask that because that doesn't work correctly. Here, I'll tell you what it's supposed to do, and then I'll show you what it actually does. What this is supposed to do is if I had that turned on, when this dude got this file, he would actually see that it is 3 of 3. So the revision number would appear there. That's not the way it's behaving. And I will just do it. I'll turn it on and watch, and you'll see pretty quickly what's going to happen here. Again, we know there's 2 files in here, this dude and this dude. We also know he can see that one because he's defined at the external stage name. But now that I turn that extra option on, watch what happens. Notice it shows an entry for this file we're not supposed to see. Now, it may very well be that this is the intended behavior, and the write-up in the manual is utterly wrong, or maybe I don't know how to read. I mean, maybe it's one of those two. I'm not sure. But as you can see, what it's doing is it's revealing that there is a file there, although I can't actually see it or do anything with it. As you could probably guess, if this guy gets approved and moves forward, and again, he's going to be defined as the external stage, that guy is now revealed to the guy sitting out here. And just to show this kind of an action one more time.
That does look like it's proper behavior with a poor explanation now.
Well, you know, the thing is, I read the write-up in the manual several times, and I got to tell you, it just doesn't make sense to me in terms of how they explained it and how it's behaving. Actually, what I'm trying to do here is upload a 4th revision of this, but I think my input rule is set to not allow any more revisions. I must have changed something. If you know what that number 1 means, you know that that means no more revisions allowed. But again, this guy over here, oh, he sees it too. I wonder, that could very well be that extra slot that I turned on is allowing him to show up. One point to make, and I'm not sure anybody would do this, but it is possible. If after your external user guy approves it, let's say you didn't want him to see it anymore, you could always put another restore stage in here and set it to one of the earlier stages, or put a new save working stage and set it to someone else. So after they see it and approve it, it would disappear from sight. But again, I'm not sure that you would want to do that, but that is the logic of how this stuff behaves.
We have another question, and I think you answered this, but to go over it again, does the externally visible page have revisions?
Yes, it can have revisions. If I can get my uploader to work here correctly, I'll show you. Because actually, that's what I was trying to do just now. Let me try to upload this page and see what it does. I'd hate to have to go in and mess with my, it's got to be my.
Yeah, view file after, whatever.
Yeah, it's my, whatever rule this thing is using. Let's see. Well, let's do a little deep dive here. It's using upload folio inversion. What the heck is that? Let's fix it. Why not? We're all about doing it right. Let's see what this thing has in it. There it is. How do you like that? It actually works the way it's supposed to. Save it. One more time. But here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to upload another version of this is the guy I really want. Yeah, I wasn't thinking properly. So this guy, to normal folks, has 4 versions on it. Okay, or 4 revisions. As far as this guy is concerned, he's only got 1 because only 1 has been pushed through to him. So if they decide now at this step, make sure he made it all the way through, they say, yeah, you know, that last one we pushed through, we shouldn't have done that. This is the good one. So internally, we know there's 4 revisions of it, but only 2 have been passed forward to the external user. So you can see all that he knows about is that there's 2 revisions of it. So it depends on who's looking at what and how they're looking at it. Bottom line is, it's your user profile that's going to determine what you see and how you see it. Again, for a regular production or admin guy, who needs to see everything, you can probably guess that their profiles default to all stages. Okay, there's one other thing I wanted to cover here. See if I can remember where it is. I think this is the file. Let's make sure. Yeah. Here's what we want. This is an interesting one to cover. This file, the original file that was submitted, has RGB images in it. We've color managed and normalized the file. And we can see, as we talked about earlier, the stage name is called normalized. Okay, fair enough. And that print ready file is going to be released. So let's do that. He's ready to be, he's going to send to the printer. Off he goes. And if we look, there he is. Now we know that many people like to take these files then, and they want to make these digital edition files out of it. They're going to run that CT vector routine in ES, and those are typically output as RGB files. Well, if our original file had RGB images in it, it would make more sense to use him to generate our digital edition file than it would be the print ready file, because the print ready file was RGB converted to CMYK, and then what, we're going to convert it back to RGB here? It would make more sense, if we're going to output an RGB digital edition, to just use the original source RGB files, so we're not whipsawing it back and forth from RGB to CMYK back. So as you remember, our stage when it comes in is defined as original. That's the guy with the RGB in it. So after we approve this, we want to tell ES to send the original file to that eTwist workflow. So we do a restore stage, feed the original RGB in here, and we should get a much closer facsimile in our final output file. So there that guy goes. And if I jump in here, here's my digital edition file. And for us, the telltale sign that I got the original on this is this thing shouldn't be trapped, which it's not. So that tells us it restored the original file. And let's make sure that I'm not cheating here. Is this really all RGB? Of course it is. Now there's a gotcha involved in what I just did. We're all happy about what we did. We approved the file, we called the original one back, we made an RGB, everybody's happy. But you got to remember that when I did this restore working stage, the current working file now is not our print ready normalized file. It's the original RGB file. And if you look, again, we can confirm this is not that trapped file anymore. So if some unsuspecting person came through and said, they screwed up that file with the printer, I got to send it to them again. They may go in and grab this and, maybe they'll download it and send it off, and that's the wrong file. So, if you're thinking of messing around with something like this, it's probably a good idea when you're done to restore the print ready file back as your working file, so no one's going to get blindsided. Let's see if I can get away with this. This is a workflow-ectomy in the middle of everything. We'll restart it from there. Let's see if this works for us. This should be the trapped file if it worked. And there it is. And you should see, although, it doesn't really matter if we've gone back and forth on this thing. The fact is the names of the defined stages are still going to appear here. So I can still get the original or the normalized one if I want. But I think it's important to make sure if you've gone back and forth with something like this, to make sure the current working file is the appropriate one that someone might expect to see if they came into this project to grab something that, is at the entire end of the workflow and is considered to be approved. I think that's all I have. There's a lot of variations you can do with this thing. I think you see within a workflow as far as saving, restoring, and so forth. But you have to be careful that of what you grab and what you define as the current file if you're messing around with these restore stage steps.
All right, ready for some questions?
If you have any, I'll try.
Yeah, we got a couple, and I'm not sure on one, but I guess basically what they're asking for here is, how much disk space are you taking up with this, and is there any way to clean the stages when you've approved your file and you're done?
That's a good question, and I don't think. Well, it is taking up disk space, not necessarily per stage, but per file, because you have to remember that in this last example that I did, for instance. We might look at this and say, there's 4. There's really not. Because working and normalized are the same. Original and input are the same. So multiple stages, I could have 10 stages in here, but it doesn't necessarily mean that I have 10 files. Really, what takes up extra space is when you create new files through something like this, right? When you send it through Twist and return it to ES, it's typically a new file. So that's the stuff that sucks up extra space. not necessarily stages. In fact, this is an example of running something through a twist workflow that doesn't get returned to ES because, this is an eTwist workflow that uses that set ignore file routine. So it processes a file and zings it out somewhere, but doesn't return it to ES. So stages in and of themselves don't necessarily suck up more space. And I also think I frankly don't know of a way to delete per stage. And I'm not sure that's necessarily a good idea because it might be difficult to sort through if the stage you're deleting is also considered to be the current active file, right? That could be dangerous because we know right now the current active file, working file, is him. But let's say you had some ES mojo and you said, that normalized file's got to go. Well, if you deleted him, you deleted him because they're the same file. No, they're not the same file. Why is that? Well, that's not right. They are. Oh, I know why. I think it might be because of where I'm viewing it. Let's do this.
Yeah, because I thought it was the same before.
Yeah, there it is. No, actually, in terms of seeing working file versus stage, it actually depends on which step you select in the eTwist workflow. I mean, in the ES workflow. If you're doing a show workflow like this, because again, watch, normalized and working are the same, right? Right here. But I think you just saw, if I go here, it's going to tell me that the original and working are the same. Let's see if I'm right. Look at that, I was right. So in a show workflow, per step, it will show you what the situation is at that step.
And that's true even of the metadata and variables, right? If you are selecting
metadata and variables, that's not true. The only way you can do that with metadata and variables is to have a dump context step in here so you can get the information at that point of the workflow. Yeah.
Let's see. Got another question. Would stages be the best feature set for use in expiring or hiding from view old assets on a DAM? Asking because I don't like DALiM's built-in asset expiration features, the watermarks.
I'd have to think about that. My first answer is probably no.
It's a way to do it. I'm not sure if it's the best way to do it.
Yeah, I mean, that almost sounds like what you're proposing is after a certain time or something, you run it through a workflow that sets it to a specific stage. Or manually doing something like, I wouldn't want to have to do it manually. That would be, I think, a little tedious.
I mean, the one other way you could do that too is to have a milestone approval that's set to time out after a set time period, like 30 days. And then swap in that other stage.
Give it the I'm old stage. If you have a milestone that's called, like I'm old, I would volunteer a picture of myself that you could use for the milestone. That would work perfectly.
All right. Then one other one, and I think this is a common question to most of the things we show. Is this part of ES Core, or do you need another license module for it?
Stages are core ES, as far as I know.
So, stages are part of, you have to have enterprise project.
You have to have like the workflow editing thing.
Yeah, which we consider basic ES.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if you can't edit a workflow, you obviously can't stick in save, restore, and all that stuff. So
enterprise tracking, I think, is a $10,000 module, if I'm not mistaken, but don't take my word on that. It may be different. And I think that's it on the questions.
Okay, I'm gonna try something daring here now. I'm gonna try to go to the last slide in here that says something about yes, every third Wednesday, right?
Every third Wednesday, is correct.
Some tricks, webinars. I have no idea what the next one is. What do you say?
What I'm targeting next one to be is going to be a first look at ES55. The beta was released this week, but right now we can't get a license that enables a couple of the features we want. But Graham should have that worked out very quickly. We'll go through it and hopefully do a webinar on some of the new features. We know sites made it in. The new workflow editor made it in. Barcode should be there in dialogue. I'm not sure which other features, but whatever we find, we'll show.
Okay. Thank you for attending, and hope to see you again next month. Thanks.